recording and be a few seconds. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Scribe. Joining me today is another author who is not only published Sentimental Dead, I might add, but she is also the founder of her own publishing house called Corvid Publishing. Joining us today, even though it is my late afternoon, her evening, joining us is Ravven White. Ravven, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. I was so excited to come and be a part of this production that you have going.
Thank you, Ravven. That really means a lot. Now, as a lot of the viewers just saw, I held up this book. Oh, there we go. The Sentimental Dead, which, if I'm not mistaken, is your novel. So what can you tell us about The Sentimental Dead?
Well, The Sentimental Dead is a post-apocalyptic dystopian vampire novel. I know it's kind of a mouthful, but it is very gritty, gothic, and kind of an adult coming-of-age story.
Nice. And it definitely is, gothic listeners and viewers. If you watch my initial impressions and listen to my review on Anchor, this book is really, really good. The imagery is fantastic. The setting is just really, really dark and bleak, which fits the tone of the story. And the characters are very, very complex, which I think is a testament to you as an author, Ravven.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Now, let's start at the beginning. So, when did you decide to become a writer? Or, a better question, when did you decide you want to pursue writing as, at first, a hobby and then possibly a career?
Well, I really enjoyed reading and writing when I was a kid and throughout like middle school and high school. And I was always writing like these really weird short stories and poetry. And I kind of fell away from it when I was an adult, but started going to therapy and working through some trauma and healing. And writing ended up being a really powerful way for me to work through all of the hard things that were hard to like speak. I could just write it down. And so I started out writing a lot of like mental health and trauma poetry. And I ended up self-publishing a couple of my own collections. And they were so well received in the writing community that it just kind of really spurred me forward. And you know, that 15-year-old girl inside of me who always dreamed of being a writer was like screaming. And so I just kind of refound my passion, I think, and just like dove full force into it.
Ah, fascinating. Very nice. And did you kind of have like a plan of what you want to be going forward with this? Did you have like an idea like what houses you wanted to publish to, or what kind of writer you wanted to be, like your own voice? Or was that kind of just like step by step and just trial and error?
Well, when I first got started, I knew that I wanted to be self-published or indie in some way.
Right.
Publishing traditionally was just not something that I was ever interested in pursuing because I started out in poetry, and poetry is already a really competitive place to be writing in.
That is true.
And what I was writing, like the kind of content, was so deeply personal that I didn't want too many like people in it, like editing it or changing it or anything like that.
Right.
I wanted to keep all of the control. So I just never really ever gave traditional publishing a thought or a chance or anything like that. I had a couple run-ins with like vanity presses when I was kind of looking into the indie community. And I fortunately didn't end up like doing anything with them. But I feel like that vanity press thing is something that a lot of really new authors often fall into or find themselves in, and they don't know any better because they make it sound really good.
Yes.
But in terms of like where I am today, I absolutely did not envision myself where I am now. because when I started writing the poetry and I published it, and then I started my own small indie press myself, and then was like dabbling in longer fiction. And I have like a couple of books I'd written during NaNoWriMo, but never
Yeah.
had like really done anything with. But this story was something that I really, really wanted to put out into the world. It was so important to me because there's just a lot of my life infused into the characters, into the atmosphere. And so, much like my poetry, I share it because I hope it will help people. My novel is much the same. It carries a lot of themes that I hope will be fun, but also validating and inclusive for people.
Nice. And would you say that when writing The Sentimental Dead, that you were in sense initially writing for yourself, but then over time after edits and revisions, kind of changing to where I'm going to write for, my audience or people who have shared similar experiences with my own?
Absolutely. It started out, so it was kind of funny because the whole reason the Sentimental Dead really got started is I was talking with my best friend, and we were talking about vampires and what it would look like if vampires were allergic to different blood types. Like if you like, like bee blood gives a vampire stomach cramps, for instance. And so we were having this conversation, and it just so then I was telling her about like these other ideas that I had for a vampire story and how cool that would be to like put it all together. And so that's how the Sentimental Dead really got like finally put onto paper, is because of I was talking about vampires being allergic to different bloods.
Yeah, and I will definitely say that was probably the one thing that really stuck with me about The Sentimental Dead, because the vampire genre itself has gone through so many iterations, so many different avenues. It's kind of hard to reinvent the vampire mythos and lore. But what you've done is, I think, very interesting, and especially the different types of vampires where they kind of act like human in a way, in terms of like some are addicts, some need like a certain blood they need to consume. You
Yes.
have the hunters, you have like the elite vampires. It's very, very fascinating. It does harken to like what we know about vampires in like media and other works of fiction, but you have definitely put your own spin on the story, which honestly is just fascinating. And I also just want to say one thing I did like about The Sentimental Dead was those little kind of like prayers or words, phrases in the beginning that really kind of set the tone, what each chapter is, and pretty much what the whole story is. Because I definitely felt that each of those poems and phrases was kind of help progressing the story. Was that intentional, or is that kind of like you start off with like the first one to get like the interest of the reader, but then they're like, oh, wait a minute, this is something I can go forward with, like that?
It was 100% intentional. So um I wanted to create like a little bit of the vampire lore or theology in my book,
Mm-hmm.
which is addressed more in the second one. And
Yes.
so each chapter beginning is part of the vampire theology text, like basically the vampire Bible. And then it was funny because I was using it to kind of promote on Instagram and kind of lead up to like the cover reveal. And I thought, oh, it would be really cool if like each chapter had one of these, because that's when I was like really getting into the interior design of it. And then I ended up having to write more because I didn't have enough to fill all of the chapters.
Right.
So, but it was, and then at the beginning there's a poem that starts everything out, and it spells out death is coming with the first letter of each line. And I thought it was a fun way to bring two types of writing together that I loved. I felt really vulnerable writing my first long fiction after basically just putting out poetry for years.
Mm-hmm.
And so putting pieces of poetry in there and creating that vampire text kind of gave me like a comfortability. There was still like a familiar way that I wrote in it, if that makes sense.
Right. And I definitely agree with you. especially as you mentioned before, as you said that this was like your very first like long novel as opposed to like
Yes.
doing poetry. It is kind of daunting, especially when writing in a style of writing that you're not familiar with. So when you finally got it published, what were the initial reviews and feedback like? Were they positive? Were they mixed? Or were they kind of like in between? And if you can, do you remember the first review you ever got from the Sentimental Dead?
Yes. Okay. I actually have it saved on my phone because I screenshotted it. And so
Yes.
when the Sentimental Dead first came out, I was like, really nervous. I think everybody is when it's your first book. You don't know how it's going to be, and you put so much into it, right?
Right.
But I was just so blown away. People were so nice. They started reading it and they loved it. They loved the way that it looked and the way that it felt. And that was one of the best compliments I've received so far, is that it's really easy to read. And it's not, it has heavy themes, but the overall read of the book is easy. It's easy to understand and it's easy to take in. But my first review I ever got, and it wasn't even a full review because the person was still reading the book, but this person had posted in their stories. So there's a character named Ash, and they had posted in their stories, if anything happens to Ash, I will kill everyone in this room and then myself.
Oh, I love those kinds of reviews because you know that they've attached to a character and now like,
Yes,
shoot, I can't kill them now.
I know. And it makes me so happy. Like, my favorite question to ask is, like, which characters were your favorite? Because it's so interesting to see who people are attracted to.
Yes, that's probably one of the most fun things when it comes to writing the characters, especially, is that you want to choose which one's going to be your favorite. And it's actually, I think it's really interesting as authors when we write the main character and we kind of push people to like the main character. A good 9 times out of 10, people will like the main character, but they'll be sold on the secondary characters, as we see in films, that it's the secondary characters that steal the show. So that's probably the most fun things. And definitely for the two main characters in the Sentimental Dead, they definitely work in harmony with each other, especially in the very dark and bleak world they live in, which kind of leads into my next question, which is, in your book, you do make it explicit that this book touches on a lot of mature themes.
Yes.
And I know some authors who, well, from ones I've read in the indie world on Inkit, they're able to do it well. Sometimes they're not able to do it well, and sometimes it backfires in their face. So, how was it writing those very mature themes to where you are not glorifying it, but
Right.
it's still tied in to the story as like, and it's an integral part of the narrative?
It was a balance, and I drew a lot of inspiration from the things that I've experienced or that people who are close to me have experienced, and I wanted it to be real and raw, but I also wanted it to show that these hard things that we go through, it isn't an end all. Like, the overall theme of my book that I wanted to carry is that are we have this question, are we born monsters or do we become them? And
Yes.
when we are forced into a situation, or we have this trauma that happens to us, our lives change, we lose someone we love, we go through really terrible things, it's like living in apocalypse, and afterwards you're in this post-apocalyptic world, and you just kind of have to like make the best of it, and it's not always like fair, and sometimes it's just awful and gritty and dark, but there's somebody out there who has also experienced similar things and is ahead of you and can show you that there is a way out. And so when I was writing through these difficult topics, I wanted to be real about it because they're real experiences, but also show that it doesn't have to make you who you are, that you have a choice.
Definitely. And honestly, it's probably one of the best works. And I will say this: I typically don't read a lot of like gothic literature. This is actually the first one I've ever read and ever bought. So reading it, I was like, what do I expect from this? And I went into this blind, not knowing anything at all. And I'm glad I didn't know anything initially, because it was so good. Very Edgar Allan Poe-ish, Bram Stoker drama, very gritty, very down to the earth. It does not shy away, but doesn't glorify these very, very sometimes brutal and violent acts, especially in the first chapter, where one of the characters tries to save a human, but that doesn't end up going well. Now, for the initial reader, they may be put off by that, because it is very, in a way, graphic imagery, but not overtly graphic. It does tell you what is happening. But again, it goes back to you as a brilliant writer. You definitely show kind of like this complex issue where in this world, you can't save everybody, but you can just save the few that are really important. And it's clearly shown in your writing that you took like a lot of research into like the other stories that have been talked about, that especially not even just vampires, but just something like the style of literature. Which then leads into my next question: is growing up, what were some of the authors that inspired you growing up, and have they still inspired you now as an author, in terms of structure of characters, the arcs of the story, and overall the world building?
So when I was growing up, I was like a very sheltered child. And so I didn't really have access to a lot of like modern literature from in the 90s, you know. But
Right.
I read a lot of the classics. So a lot of Charles Dickens, a lot of Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, the Bronte sisters, um, Emily Dickinson, Edgar
Hmm.
Allan Poe. And so I would say I was really heavily influenced, especially by Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights was like one of my favorite stories, and Jane Eyre also. And I really liked the darkness to it, the tragic romance, the you know, just like there's like this grittiness to them that made these characters like so deeply flawed, but you were still so attracted to them. And so I think, you know, having consumed a lot of that older literature, it definitely influenced how I write presently. And I still consider like Charles Dickens to be like a comfort read. So it's probably silly. But I don't know. I really enjoyed a lot of the classics when I was growing up, and I still do. And I read a lot more indie literature now, and I enjoy it immensely. There are so many talented Gothic indie writers in today, but I think my heart will always belong to the classics.
See, you and I are the opposite. I tried reading the classics. I'm sorry to those that like those stories. I got lost. Were not my cup of teas. I read them in high school, but I was like, I can't. But as I've grown older, I found out like my niche, the stories that I liked, which was historical fiction, fantasy, and all that stuff. And now reading other genres in those specific categories, it's allowed me to see that there are a lot of other stories. And when reading your book, The Sentimental Dead, it kind of pushed me to where like, maybe I should give indie Gothic literature a try. And who knows? I may get the next few books that you have coming out, and I may even get the ones of the Curious Corvid soon.
Well, I can recommend plenty.
And actually, speaking of recommendations, so as you grew up and reading all the different books, now where you are right now, what books would you say have pushed you to be a better writer and a better author?
Well, I have been like so deeply involved in the indie community now and surrounded by so many talented authors. And a couple of them that I really enjoy, some of the books that I've read recently was Hello Dove by Gillian Dowell and Solita. Oh, Solita is so good. It's like gothic demon romance. It's amazing. I love it so much. And Vivian is just this incredible storyteller. Bloodborne by Stephanie Kemler. Stephanie is another, she is also a vampire enthusiast, and hers is a vampire novel also. And she has like culty, blood drinking, kind of ancient religion vibes to it, which is just
Okay.
incredible. And then Grace R. Reynolds. She is a dark poet and short story writer, and the things that she creates is just very visceral and raw, and she does a lot of like dark horror poetry. And so those I think are some of my favorite writers currently, and I just consume everything that they have.
That's actually really interesting. And it actually kind of leads into my next question is, whenever you're writing either poetry or working on the next books in your series, do you write for yourself or do you write for an audience in mind? Because this is where it kind of gets more to like the business side is even in like traditional publishing, hybrid, or even indie, more times you generally try to write for the market that you're in. And since Gothic literature has like so many different avenues, of course, it leads to a lot of opportunities. But I think you would also agree when you pick like a specific category to write in, either it's undead, werewolf, vampire, ghosts, any other tropes, and then kind of narrows in into those specific niches where everyone is kind of almost written almost the same thing, but trying to be unique and spread your own voice. Have you kind of had that business sense in mind when writing your stories? Because obviously you want to write for yourself, but you also want to write to generate a profit.
So I think that that is a really important balance. I think number one, always you should always write for yourself. I think that you should write, I think if you're trying to force something for somebody else, it's not going to be your best work. I think the
Right.
very best work you could ever create is when you are staying true to yourself and you're writing the story that you know that you have in you. But when it comes to marketability and like preparing it for an audience, I think that you being accessible as an author and having people kind of get to know you, like not invasively, of course, but
Right.
when you're interacting with people, they're invested in you, which will make them more invested in your book. And then when you are going for it and you're going into publishing, making sure that it is, clean and well edited and well formatted and just beautiful, that you have a cover that matches the aesthetic and the vibe, that all goes into the marketability of your book. Like, I can't tell you how important it is when you hold a book and you open it. The feel, we say, oh, don't judge a book by its cover, but we do. And you
Yes,
want
that's
your
true.
cover and you want your design to be as beautiful as and important as the content itself. So I think that there is always going to be things or tropes that are popular or genres that do better than others. But I think at the end of the day, if you're writing for yourself and you're writing with that true passion, that you will find those readers who are meant to read your book, and you will have a better target audience as well. If you are kind of just like writing a little bit for yourself, but also trying to make it as marketable as possible, I think that you will saturate your book too much. I think it's
Right.
better to have, a smaller, more focused group of dedicated and loyal readers. And I think you find that by being loyal to your voice as an author.
Yes, and that's probably even more true, especially for indie authors, because
Yeah.
yes, listeners, when it comes to marketability, indie authors have to do a majority of the work. It's not easy. We
No.
have to literally flood every social media platform with our stories to try to spread the word. And that takes a lot of trial and error to see what sites generate the most feedback, what groups that we're in have been with us. So it takes a lot of work. And ultimately, that kind of leads into probably the big question that I didn't want to ask you is your publishing house, Curious Corvid Publishing. So how did that come about? I think you mentioned it in the beginning, but when you began the publishing house, did you kind of have this little fear in the back of your mind that in the world of giant publishing houses that it's not going to last long or it's going to have a small audience?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. In fact, like during my first year, it was like almost a crushing fear that I would invest so much into this, or that I would, be doing all of this stuff and it wouldn't mean anything in the long run, or that it wouldn't work out. So yeah, it was a very real fear. And it still is. Sometimes it still creeps up, but now that we're like, into our second year and everything, and we're still growing and it's kind of like stabilizing. And so that fear is not so strong. But in the beginning, it really was, because there is like, you could probably throw a stone and hit a small publisher or a traditional one. And so there is a lot of, and there's a lot of other amazing presses out there.
Yes.
I have the pleasure of working with a bunch of different and knowing other presses that do amazing and fantastic jobs. And I think that is important too, is recognizing that we don't have to be competition. We can be supportive of each other. We can lift each other up. We don't have to look at each other as, or put each other down because we think that, we're competition, because we're not. We all have stories to tell. We're all different, and there's room for everybody at the table.
That's beautifully said. That it's 100% true. It's the world of reading and everything. It's already a tough business as it is. The last thing we want is to pretty much go after each other, when instead we can build connections and help spread each other's works and help get the name out. Which, speaking of names, how did the name Curious Corvid come about? Because that's a very interesting and very unique name for a publishing house.
Well, so my name is Ravven, obviously, and so I love and have an affinity for corvids. And so I also have an affinity for alliteration. And so I wanted to incorporate crows or corvids or something like that into the title. And then one thing that I have been consistently called throughout my life, besides disgustingly optimistic, is curious. And so I was just like running through some things in my head one day, and I was just like, Curious Corvid. Curious Corvid. Curious Corvid Publishing. And there it was. And so I immediately Googled it to see if there was like another business out there. And I think there is a Curious Corvid business, and it's like a printer, and it's like in Colorado, I think.
Right.
But there was no other like big business or publishing house. And so I was like, that's it. That's my name.
Nice. That's actually pretty cool. And seeing, especially the Discord, especially the names like Curious Corvid, it definitely catches your eye. And it's also a thing with ravens. I don't know what it is, but an image with a raven, it's going to draw people's attention, which honestly, it grabbed my attention because it's just an amazing and unique name. And I just mentioned before that this is your second year, so congratulations on that.
Thank
That's a huge achievement. Another important question I did want to ask you is, and this is kind of a more personal one, which is, as writers, we've all experienced burnouts. We've all experienced days where we don't want to write. We don't want to write at all. We just want to give up. So for you, Ravven, what is your why? What keeps you writing? And what has allowed you to keep writing? And did you ever have those private thoughts where maybe I should just stop?
So I would say that my biggest why for writing is that it brings me so much joy. And it has brought me a lot of healing too, and given me a really safe outlet to work through and kind of figure out and give a voice to my inner thoughts, my inner child, my inner traumas in a safe way that also makes it relatable for other people. And I think even if, I think I would always be writing in some capacity, even if it wasn't being published. I would still write for myself, and I have definitely had times where I think, oh, I don't know why I'm doing this. I have struggled with imposter syndrome so badly.
Hmm.
And, oh, who do I think that I am? And I don't know what I'm doing. And I should just delete this all or throw it in the trash. I've definitely experienced that. And it can be a really hard thing to work through and to overcome, especially when you are surrounded by equally talented writers in the community. But
Definitely.
one thing that I learned was so important was my community. And having friends who were also writers that I respected and that I admired, who respected me back, and having that relationship where I could reach out when I was struggling or when I was going through a hard time or when I was stuck, and being like, hey, I'm working on this piece and I cannot figure out what to do. Could you read it? Would you mind reading it over or giving me your thoughts on it? And having that and people giving you feedback and, oh, this is really good. Here's some ideas. It kind of reinvigorates me and helps me like stay on task and keep going. But I definitely feel that when you're reaching that point of burnout or that you're just you just can't do it anymore, I think that is really the value of having friends that are dependable and that are safe places for us to exist and to ask for help, because asking for help is really hard sometimes. So I
That's
think,
true.
yes, I think that writing can be kind of a lonely job because we're all here. No one's going to write our stories for us, right?
Right.
So I think it's really important to have that community around you of people that are uplifting you and supporting you and that believe in you, maybe more than you believe in yourself.
That is actually 100% true. I 100% agree with you. When I actually started in the indie community, probably back in 2020, when I was getting my master's, I did not expect to meet a lot of people. I know now going on 3 years, and I've made some of the most lasting friendships. Kim Applegrin, shout out to her, was probably the first person that I've met on Inkit. She's actually been my biggest supporter, biggest cheerleader, and hers, of course. And Mavericks Ghost, John Gifford, Timidin, J. Allen Winchester, Autumn Amber, Lady Rowan, and Mystical Mode. Shout out to them because they were the two people that reviewed my story, The Gathering, which was an amazing feeling, especially actually almost like you making the journey to get a novel off the ground and just not knowing how it's going to go. And now looking back and it's like, wow, all these people were tied to the success of this book. Because yes, even though we as authors write the book, it will be criminal not to acknowledge the people that have helped us, who have supported us, who's given us feedback. No matter how critical it is, they contributed to the growth of the story, as well as us as authors, which I think is highly important and should always be considered.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree.
Yes. And another question I did want to ask you is, growing up, were you part of any writing communities or writing groups? And possibly now, older, are you part of any other online writing groups?
I wasn't when I was younger. I didn't really have any opportunities, when I was really young, but now I am. So I'm actually part of, I have a local writers group. It's called Awful. And we're awful writers, but it's a whole long acronym. And they are really wonderful, talented, locally based authors that are just very inspiring. And so I'm part of that writing group. And then also we have, our own little thing at Curious Corvid, where we're writing and getting our manuscripts ready, and a lot of the authors will swap their stories for arcs and things like that, which I think is really nice that we have that in our house, that we have authors helping each other out and getting
Right.
everybody ready to go, which I really like to see because, again, community is important. So, but yes, writers groups can be a really helpful thing, especially if you're in a specific genre.
Yes, I would definitely say too. That they definitely bounce ideas off each other, and sometimes I haven't used this in a long time, and I actually want to hear your thoughts on it, which is writers are liars, cheaters, and thieves. That's an old one for listeners who have followed me before, because if you think about it, we're liars because we make stuff up. We're cheaters because we kind of cheat people out of our time, and we steal from others because, as I mentioned before, the same story has always been written, just tweaked here, tweaked there, reinventing. So what are your thoughts on that? Writers are liars, cheaters, and thieves.
I think that's really funny. So I know that I'm definitely a thief because Von Fox is literally the name of a customer that I knew. So there was this, he was a really nice old man, and he would come in on Sundays to my day job, and his name was Von Fox, and I thought it was the most magical name I'd ever heard. And I was like, I am 100% stealing your name. So I just changed the spelling of it a little bit, but otherwise I totally stole the whole name.
Yeah, and for me also, and listeners, for those who have read my books on Inkit, you'll figure this out. I am a big movie nerd, and a lot of my scenes and characters are kind of stolen from movies. Like, there's actually one or actually a few scenes in some of my stories where I literally sometimes may take the actual dialogue between the characters and just tweak it a little bit, because I have that image in my head of what I know I want the story to go like, especially for the battle scenes. I'm a big proponent of battle scenes in like stories, depending on like what it is. It doesn't have to be like a grand battle, but it's like a battle between like the hero or the villain, or a hero and an obstacle. I have an idea of what kind of movie or TV show or even video game fits that, and I was like, I spend way too much time to think of this, which is also the curse of a writer. We never stop thinking. We're
Yep.
always reinventing, always adding. And that's actually another fun little question I want to ask you is, whenever you're thinking of new ideas, you just jot them down in like a little notebook, or do you just continuously house them in your head? And then one day you're at a computer, it's like, oh, wait, I can use that little idea.
So I do jot them down on my phone in my notepad, and I have so many folders that are like different projects that I think would be really cool. And I'm a very vivid dreamer. So a lot of
Same.
my inspiration comes from my dreams. I have a book in the works called The Bloodstone, and there's like a
Oh,
whole scene, the whole book, like the plot of the book, just copy paste from my dream.
dang, that is a very
So
vivid dream if you're able to make an entire book out of it.
I know. I'll wake up
But
feeling
that's
exhausted.
Yeah, but that's one of the things about being a writer. That sounds like the drawback. We never stop thinking. We always have to write everything down. But that's always kind of the fun thing about it too. We're always using these ideas, and if we don't use them for the main story, we may use it for a future story in the works, which is also kind of fun too.
Definitely.
Yeah. There's a few last questions I did want to ask you before we got to the final questions. So there's a fun little question I haven't asked my guests in a while, which is, if you could write in a genre different from your own, what genre would that be, and what story would you want to write?
Ooh. Okay. Um I think that I would want to write in science fiction.
Ooh,
I really enjoy science fiction as a whole. It's not something that I ever have tried to write in though. Um, and I really like, okay, so I really enjoy Star Trek and Doctor Who. And so I think that I would probably want to write a story that's like a blend of the two.
Interesting. You kind of lost me with Star Trek and Doctor Who. I'm sorry, I have not watched those. I can't say I haven't watched those, but I kind of see them every now and then. I'm a Star Wars nerd through and through. If you've seen my other posts on
I do like
Instagram,
Star Wars. I don't think it's true you have to like one or the other.
it's just Star Wars to me, and it gets harked back to the fantasy aspect because Star Wars does have a lot of fantasy and a lot of history to it. Star Trek, I'm sorry, it is, I think, the quintessential science fiction. Actually, that's probably the best way you can describe it. Star Trek is very science fiction. Star Wars is a space opera that has science fiction elements to it. It's a space fantasy in the stars.
Yeah, that's fair.
That is, but science fiction, that's actually a very interesting one. Yes, please join the science fiction club.
Maybe someday.
Hey, you ever need help with that? I'm more than happy to help you with those plots and those characters because I never stop.
Okay, good to know.
Nice. And another fun little question is, well, this actually is kind of another more personal question, which is where you're at right now, how has writing changed your life, and what is probably a word of advice you would want to give to yourself just starting out on this path? So pretty much if you can go back in time with the knowledge you know now,
Yes.
what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think that if I could go back in time and give my younger self advice, I would say you absolutely don't know everything, but you 100% can learn, and you don't have to put up with that like deeply rooted imposter syndrome.
Right.
I think that's what I would tell my younger self. It's okay that you don't know everything because you can learn, and you will.
That's actually really beautiful. That's actually really, really beautiful. And we've now reached the last two final questions, which are kind of like the most important questions. So the first one is, have you ever had a sense of validation? So what I mean is when you started writing poetry and starting spreading your wings and sharing your voice with people around you, and then writing the Sentimental Dead, and then, or I may have this reversed, the publishing house, did you kind of get that sense of validation from others in the community? You're saying, we like what you're doing, you belong here? Because again, it goes back to that, I just said, that imposter syndrome, because it's kind of scary actually wanting to be an author of trying to establish who you are. And the other big question is, which you kind of already alluded to with the other one, which is what advice you give yourself, is what advice would you give to future authors or people that are writing and want to get their voice heard, or people who just want to get their voice heard in general?
So, I think that my validation was when I started my publishing house, because I was still kind of new, like in the indie community, and poetry is so subjective and
Yes.
it can be taken like so many ways. So I was never really bothered by people who were put off by my poetry, because I just, it's just not for you, and that's okay.
Right.
And so I think my really first like validating moment was when I started my publishing house and I started posting about it, and I was nobody and I had nothing. I had no I had nothing there to back me up to prove that I could do the things that I said I was doing. And I put an ad out on Instagram saying that my house was open for submissions, and I didn't think that I would get any. And I got so many. Like, I was completely taken by shock and surprise. And I ended up, interviewing a bunch of people, and reading amazing manuscripts from all over the world, and ended up signing 13 people in my first year.
Wow.
And there I was, I only had my own 2 books out, and all of these people who just believed what I said and just like went along with it. And it still shocks me because and it's very humbling to me also that to have anybody have that much faith in you when you don't even have that much like to show for it, but they just see something in you that they feel is special and is different. And so they just they just believe you and support you, and then you work together and you're making it happen. And that was a really big, it's terrifying, don't get me wrong, but it was a really big moment for me when I was like, I can't believe all these people are just like, okay. And if I was to give advice to any new author starting out or trying to figure things out, I think the biggest piece of advice I could offer is to take your time and to slow down, because it's so exciting, when you have your work and you want to get it out there. And with KDP and Ingram Spark and the ability to self-publish, you can do it on your own if you want to, and you can do it so fast and easily. And or when you're looking for a publisher, it can be, you might get like a yes from the first person that you see. You're probably not likely to, but I would say to take your time and to not give up and to really figure out what it is you want out of your writing. And then make sure that your writing is the best version in its current state that it can be. When I first started, my first book was a travesty. It had a lot of errors in it, and it had, because that was back when I self-published in 2018. And it had, it was a rushed thing because I was just so excited to get it out into the world. And so when I ended up pulling it and republishing it through my company and just changed it and really sat with it to develop it and make it. And it was 100 times better the second time around, because I took that time to invest into it and to give it what it deserved and to give myself what I deserved in how I was representing myself and my work.
That is actually probably the truest thing. Patience and time. And that harkens to me too, because my first book, The Gathering, which I'm in the process of self-publishing, that has taken me 5 years to get off the ground. I started writing this in 2018 during my undergrad in Vegas. And at one point, I put it to the side because I thought I'm probably not going to get it done. And that went through a series of changes. During the pandemic, the height in 2020, everyone was online. My school was online. I had to go back home to SoCal. And it's like, I need something to do. So I just started writing. And in less than a year, I finished a book that now fully completed is 41 chapters long, and finished another novel right after that, and then finished another novel after that. That's just me being a masochist. I just love just writing for pain. But yeah, I mean, time and patience, because you want to be the most authentic version of yourself. And that goes back to one of the earlier questions, is that you want to write for an audience to be marketable, to generate a profit, but you do want to be the truest version of yourself at the end of the day.
Yeah. 100%.
Definitely.
When I was writing The Sentimental Dead, it was supposed to come out the year prior. And then I started my business, and I got so busy doing everybody else's work that mine had to like take a back seat. And I felt like really, I felt kind of like a fraud, because I was like, how is anybody going to trust me to put out their books if I couldn't even get mine done?
Right.
And so that was really hard for me to take that step back and have to pull my book from the list of things that was going to get published that year, because it just wasn't ready. But I'm so glad that I did, because the cover art that is on it today is completely different than what I had at that time. And the story changed a lot too, and because I was also in a transition period in that, in my life, and so I was able to really dig deeper and talk about more raw things. So initially it was really hard, but I'm so grateful now that it was delayed and that it didn't come out when I thought that it was going to.
That's actually true. And honestly, it shows. I mean, the cover is amazing. The story is fantastic. And I just wish you the best success
Thank
going
you.
forward, Ravven.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, listeners, we've reached the very end of this interview. But before we close this out, I want to ask Ravven, where can people find and engage with you to learn more about the Sentimental Dead, to learn more about you, and if they want to take a chance and join your publishing house?
We are very active on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So you can find us at Curious Corvid Publishing, or my personal page is Ravven_White on Instagram. And I'm always happy to talk with people about books and publishing. And then you can always check out our website, www.curiouscorvidpublishing.com. And we have everything listed out in terms of submissions. We'll be opening the house up later this year for book submissions. And in the meantime, we have the Magpie Messenger, which is our literary journal, and that has submissions open all year long. So definitely feel free to reach out because I love connecting with people.
Definitely. And I will link all those in the description below, as well as the link to buy Ravven's Sentimental Dead. Again, I cannot stress this enough. This is a fantastic read, everybody. Give it a chance. I mean, come on. It literally looks like a lock and case. Actually, kind of is that. So definitely go check it out. It's a fantastic read. And I wish you all the best going forward in Curious Corvid. And Ravven, thank you so much for joining the series, joining this episode. And I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. And again, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you.
And with that, listeners, this concludes another author interview. Make sure to like and subscribe and share the word, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.